Welcome, everyone, today to workshop 4 in our back to school sessions, trauma-informed suicide prevention for administrators. My name is Leora. I'm the School Mental Health Field Director for the Pacific Southwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. This is the 4th session of this series. They are our colleagues at the Center for Applied Research Solutions, which is our home base for the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, TA Center. Today, we're going to start with a grounding on the trauma-informed principle that roots us in this practice of what it means to be a trauma-informed suicide preventionist as an administrator. And the themes today are safety and peer support. And then Angela and Tina are going to walk us through what it means, some baseline trauma-informed principles and suicide prevention. And then they're going to offer a lot of practical applications for this work, including real-life examples from the bodies of work that Tina has led on the ground. At least have you walk away with one new broadened awareness or one new way that you as a leader can approach providing suicide prevention in a trauma-informed way through either yourself and or collaboration with community partners and relationships with young people themselves. So this invitation is, you don't have to be the mental health provider as an administrator. You do need to know and be aware of all of the underbelly and sometimes what's over the surface of pain that folks are holding in your community, what we can do both as systems and cultures and societies to know, hold, prevent, and intervene, and with whom you can partner to be alongside you in this work. We're going to take a couple of minutes to talk about safety and peer support. So these are the trauma-informed principles that root this particular practice. And I'd like us to contextualize it in the context of suicide prevention. So we know that there are many trauma-informed principles, and that the trauma-informed principles are actually values that help our individual and collective bodies regulate and respond to when we are feeling harm or when we are feeling rupture. And what kinds of experiences we need in order to get back into our bodies and back into our nervous systems to be able to think and feel at the same time. It's really what those principles are about. What comes up for you when you think about these principles in connection to suicide prevention? We know that safety means a lot of different things to everyone. With that, I'm handing it to Angela.
So I'm Angela Castellanos. Pronouns are she and her, she, hers. And I come to this space with experience. I was a school social worker, moved up to be a program specialist, then became the coordinator of mental health for a school district. And we picked this road here because we know that in school systems, whenever there's a process that we need to implement, right? Or like Leora was mentioning, the checkbox. There's so many different ways to go about the work, right? And so some roads might be, there might be hills. It could be also a hill, could be another like representation of what the work that we're doing. But as Leora mentioned, I have that experience in being that school social worker and really connecting with the school environment around the implementation of suicide prevention, right? So suicide prevention as we know it, me attending my MSW graduate program, we knew we had to learn this, the process to really supporting the individual that was in front of us, right? So if anybody posed a risk for suicide, we had the process, we were informed. And so prior to any kind of implementation of policy, we already had that knowledge and work. So really connecting with families and individuals was really a stepping stone, or actually the groundwork within the Masters in Social Work program as I was part of. But in, looking through this road, so we started that process, right? Our journey has been in our education, our experience. And then, we enter the school system and learning about the process. And then here in California, we're going to be sharing what that experience is like as the Assembly Bill 2246 was implemented in 2016, right? So that's an experience. And then also then following Assembly Bill 1767, which focuses on the younger students. And so again, we're here to share our story and our experience in our leadership in schools, gathering those particular structures and process to implement. And so we're going to go back and forth. We're going to go back to 2016 or back to our experience in our education, but also like fast forward, like where we are now with this process. And so we're continuing to look and implement and even pivoting, right? So in 2020, we had to pivot a lot of different practices, going to a virtual, right? Supporting individuals who are at risk for suicide as well. So lots of different journeys and roads and just, conversations around practices, implementation processes, and then also thinking about sustainability, right? So how does that, and the road ends, I mean, that's just a picture, but it's going to continue, right? Because we're going to keep evolving around this work. Just a quick recap around trauma-informed practices. And so again, everybody here is an expert around this piece. And we're looking at trauma and what trauma is. So we're looking at three experiences, right? So there are three factors connected to trauma. So we have the event, right? So what happened? We have the experience, and then we also have the effect, right? So everybody experiences trauma differently, right? So there's different reactions, and so we're supporting everyone in that experience. And so how does this connect to suicide prevention? On the next slide is really like a transformation, right? So we're constantly evolving around suicide prevention in that work. And so this awareness, having that awareness of the 3 E's in trauma really provides the opportunity for us as school leaders to develop practices that are supportive to students and families, right? So thinking about that arrow, right? So we'll have that awareness, we have trauma informed, and then we're looking at trauma sensitive components as well. And so as we're looking at these pieces, we want to ensure that school districts, school sites understand the impact, right? The impact that it has on individuals, and really encouraging schools to develop a trauma sensitive approach that further helps to making sense of the experience, right? So, and this could look like in different ways, but one of the, opportunities is really for us to support staff members to recognize and understand how students respond to trauma, right? And practices that support that healing practice, encouraging that resilience. Leora talked about that earlier, so that was beautifully said in the beginning. It also is going to require some changes around our mission and vision and practices and policies and culture, right? So as we're rebuilding, we're reassessing the body of work that we're doing, it's really going to be incorporated in those practices as well. And we also want to ensure that we support students and families and identify what supports they need in a trauma responsive way as well. And again, encouraging partnerships with the community organizations to make sure that all of the resources are available. So really embracing that student when they're experiencing any kind of suicidal ideation or thought or response. The next slide just really gives us an opportunity to just do like a little quick reflection around. So this particular slide just gives us an opportunity to just look at the framework in a different way when we're looking at a trauma-informed program or school district or school site, right? So it's another way to look at these practices that are integrated into the development of the suicide prevention work that we're doing. And then throughout the presentation today, we're going to demonstrate how, Tina and I, with our experience in schools, how these practices were integrated in the work that we connected to. So we know that there's a need, right? We know that there's that experience. And so the awareness, we wanted to put the statistics in here just to exemplify the statistics around the need, right? So quickly quickly glancing at this particular slide, what stands out to you, right? So you're thinking about some of the pieces that are identified here, how many students are at risk, right? So I'm not going to read the slide, but just kind of thinking about some of that work and also these are some national statistics, right? So also bringing it home back to your own local environments or your own local school sites or school districts and the impact that it has, right? So it's really identifying those pieces there. The first piece around the suicide prevention policy is focusing on the prevention aspect, right? So that's one of the pieces. And I'm going back to the implementation of this policy. And I'm going to go quickly on this experience because most of you are from California, from what I saw in the chat. So I'm just going to quickly go through this aspect here. But here are several different examples of different policies from different counties in the state of California, but also national recommendations as far as like what are some of the recommendations around suicide prevention policies. Like I said, you probably are very aware of all the different resources available, but these are these aspects that you can actually connect to. So we started to quickly gather information. By that time, I was a coordinator, administrator at a medium to large size school district in Orange County. And we already had a really good basis for identifying students. We had a procedure in place, but we needed to just kind of fine tune some of the aspects covered around suicide prevention. So for those that are not familiar, that are not in California, Assembly Bill 2246 focused on every school district in the state of California had to have a suicide prevention policy that focused on prevention, intervention, and postvention. And so the first piece that we had to do is really create that plan and thinking about looking at the landscape analysis and kind of thinking about our resources, what we have available already. So we connected with we created and developed a task force that included board members, teachers, students, parents, community organizations, and we all came together to have a conversation around how do we best support students in our schools, right? We had data, we had some information that was really rich so that we can start having this conversation around that. And the task force was really instrumental in developing some of these, the wording. I mean, even though there was already some templates available that we were able to utilize, we were actually internally creating some of these resources and was able to pass the board policy super quickly because we just had to move fast in this conversation. And so as we're entering this particular policy, once the board policy was passed, we quickly started working right on safe messaging because that's one of the big aspects around the policy. So we started focusing on those aspects around how do we support and get the languaging across the entire culture of the school district to support students. This particular slide coming up, it illustrates all the trauma-informed language that we were able to develop during our process. And we know that in suicide prevention work, it's really important for us to create a support and languaging that's going to be supportive for students as well. And so one of the things that we were able to create is with teachers specifically related to how do we change the wording from commit suicide to either die by suicide. That was a really instrumental process for us to change, right? Because it really creates that safety aspect that Leora was talking about when we're thinking about suicide prevention, right? We want students to be able to feel supported. So that's really an important piece that we talked about. And these are some additional examples that you can actually access to find additional recommendations on suicide prevention, safe messaging resources, and practices in schools. The next part of it too, I'm going to quickly go through this because I want Tina to share some of the stories around the intervention aspects, because those are really important to share as well. But these are some of the pieces that we started to work on in the training aspect, right? So we had some core training for staff, and trainings for students, and also training for parents, because that was the bulk of the work that we did in the beginning. And so these are the pieces that we talked about. And one of the aspects around the training for staff was really developing the roles and responsibilities. As a school leader, one of the pieces that I constantly, we had a lot of discussion around, specifically with human resources, right? Because we also had an internal process for us to have a conversation about roles and responsibilities. So that was a really key piece around that aspect, is to have those conversations around how can we do this work. And I remember, as a school social worker, one of the pieces that I thought about is, I know for some of you have the direct practice with students, is that it was very overwhelming, right? So as I entered into the space of providing services to students, I oftentimes found myself like, conducting risk assessments on a weekly basis, and sometimes it increased like on a daily basis. So it really became an overwhelming process for me. And so that really helped me to design a process that was supportive and enhancing for the school mental health staff. So I really thought about, how do I support the school mental health staff to develop the confidence and competence in conducting risk assessments. So we really developed guidelines around referrals. Consulting was a huge piece for us, and also training, but really expanding, right, the capacity. And I remember, walking into that particular school district when I was hired as an administrator, and we had one team, following up with 32,000 students. And I said, how can this happen? Right. So I really didn't want to burn out the staff. And so part of it was really expanding that team. And so we went from training, actually from having just one particular team conducting all the risk assessments in the school district. We actually had we expanded within a year to train all of our school mental health staff, our school psychologists, our school social workers. So we went from 4 team members to 75. So every school site had a team, had a, there was a consultation model that was developed. So that really helped to not only support the school staff, but also support the families, right? So really following up with that piece. So that was super helpful. I'm really thinking about the stories or training for students. Once you built it, they'll come, right? So we started having conversations with students and the training, and they were actually really supporting each other as well. So I remember, students coming to my office and bringing their friends or their concerns around, something that they heard, right? Because we started to do a lot of training. So we kept a lot of data, right? So we know that when there's more information, it's almost like when you're in the market for buying a new car and you want a white car, right? So all of a sudden you start seeing white cars on the road. So a lot of students and families and also staff were starting to come and just started to have questions around suicide. So we saw a spike, but then we saw a stabilization a couple of years later because of all of the work that we were doing as well. And parents were also supported, right? Because they didn't know how to talk to their student, how to talk to staff whenever there was a concern around what was happening as well. And so these are just some examples. I know there's many more examples out in the field now around training. There's a lot of evidence-based work. There's a lot of good work that's going out there as well. So that's so nice to see, fast forward to today, is that we have such a rich list of information and resources that we're able to access as well.
I get to have somewhat of a fun part, I think. Not that your part wasn't fun, but I get to have a little bit of show and tell. So humor me with this, but I also hope that there's some nugget that you can take with you, something that might be new, something that's validating to what you're already doing. But where I want to take you in this next part is really from the principles and from the policy, and how in my time with our district, was able to be a part of this whole movement to put it into practice. I consider this more of like an overview slide, right? Of possible interventions that can be used when we're thinking about implementing trauma-informed practices in regards to suicide prevention. When we're talking about it, it's considering all of the different interventions that would be impactful and meaningful for students at different levels of risk and need, right? We are probably thinking about collaboration, right? What partners do we want to include, internal, external, and what has to be in place? We're all kind of burdened by that practice of MOUs, memorandums of understanding, and making sure we have those formal and sometimes informal partnerships, right? Whatever it is we need to do to bring support to our kids. With suicide prevention liaisons, a crisis team. Okay, so part of the reason I think I'm here is because I have the experience and, dare I say, passion and love for crisis response. A good chunk of my work within schools has been with crisis response teams and in the postvention work, unfortunately, after something has already happened. And I say that because it's given me perspective of not only respecting and honoring the space of being there with individuals and groups who've lost somebody, but it gives me insight as to how do we help these individuals and the school community itself move through this crisis, this grief. And again, helped inform the process of suicide prevention, right? What can we do ahead of time? So in this third bullet, I just want to highlight that you might be thinking too, how do we build up this crisis team? Who needs to be on it? But we're thinking about a specialized group of folks we bring together, making sure we have the safe messaging that Angela mentioned earlier, that we're honoring, and using words that are healing as opposed to harmful is so important, because many of you can share stories like that we've all heard, where a student would tell you, that's my friend, that's not, and maybe somebody well-intentioned used a term that was offensive or hurtful without that intent. We want to honor the loss here. We want to honor the person that's been impacted. Claudia shares trained staff and faculty on the effects of trauma, since they are first persons in an educational institution that may see a student in need. Absolutely. I want to share with you some things that I think will validate that it's not just about building the teams, right, who provide the direct support, but what about our educators? We've been asking educators in the last few years to do more, provide more support, but we have to give them that kind of, give them the tools in which to do that. So training absolutely is critical. I see youth-led campus organizations. We'll talk about that in kind of the second tier of interventions I'm going to share, but thank you for that, Dan. And Christina shares, as a county supporting the school districts, providing education and outreach with resources, also assisting with post-crisis hospitalization reintegration meetings. I love that. We might use different terms here for crisis response or postvention, post-crisis hospitalization reintegration. I've called it in the past reentry, but we're doing this, right, to help our schools, our districts, our school communities really adjust to what's coming, because what we know is that things continue to happen, things continue to come at them, and we want to make sure, again, we prepare them, support them, and help them through. So thank you for all of these examples, and I hope, again, you're validated by the pieces that I share here. Coming back to the slide, I just want to share that, you know, through this process, we've always tried to consider parents. So I'll kind of chunk in the next 3 bullets and just say, we wanted to see a couple of things. Parents wanted information at every level. If their student was hospitalized, they wanted information, because that was such a scary experience of seeing nodding heads, because it is. and very commonly, there isn't any information except for when the student or the child is checked in and when they are discharged, but we need more info for parents. And then we have parents on the other hand, and who didn't know how to have the conversation, that we're still afraid that if we brought up the word suicide, like, doesn't that plant the seed? And so we had varying levels of like, let's get information to parents, let's empower them and include them in this process. And more information is good information, is helpful, right? So making sure that they know the referral pathway, the referral process, how critically important it is to maybe consent to communication between all supportive parties in that release of information. We wanted to make sure parents had all the info they needed. You know, looking further, one of the things that was really scary, I think, for not only our educators and our parents and guardians, was also the involvement of protective services. You know, the system in and of itself is tough. And when we had students who were assessed and maybe had to go into hospitalization, or who maybe needed follow-up support, how scary it is when a family member doesn't understand maybe that there is a need to ensure that there's continued outpatient services, that we have to continue to go to these appointments, that medication is important, and to ensure or to know the process of continuing that medication beyond the hospital is key. But I think a lot of times processes move towards calling protective services, right? And that was scary because I think where protective services is this opportunity to provide support in the home, a lot of times it's still linked to the fact that they might take my child away from me, and that fear of bringing in another institution, another group that could get involved and I could get in trouble, is something that is real for families. And so how do you involve them and really remind that we are truly coming from a place of support, right? And framing that message too, that if we bring someone in to assess your child, that really it is a form of help. And we want to make sure your child has all the support that they need. Local resources. I think that there are masterful collaborators on here. And I was just going to say that we are always involving them. I mentioned informal or formal. With law enforcement, I want to honor the fact that every district, school, county may have a different relationship with law enforcement. But when you have seen trauma-informed practices or an understanding of that from your law enforcement agency that you're partnering with, absolutely include them in for the support of your school community. And when it's not, then of course we bring in other resources, right? And so we look to local community partners. As we go further, we're not going to dive deep into the details of safety planning and reentry and all of that, but I will share some examples. But what I want to say is that the list, even if the words kind of change in that subcategories bullet list there, you might have different names for the terms that I'm sharing here. But what I want to say is that not every suicide prevention practice is trauma informed. So I'm going to encourage us to, as you go through this, is to really begin to question, to check, do regular checks on, is the language up to date? Is the messaging as it is or informed based on what we know now? And just continual reevaluation, reassessment of those tools we're using, because wonderful resources come up all the time, backed by research. And so, within California, we were tasked with looking at and revising our suicide prevention policies every 5 years. But we encouraged, in my role as a regional mental health coordinator, we encouraged districts to look at their suicide policies yearly. And when they needed it, the support. So I know there's county Department of Ed folks and county folks here. That is one way to absolutely support, is to help in that revision and keeping up to date with all of the information and resources out there. Now, I want to jump in, and I mentioned that there would be tiers. And by no means do I feel like you have to do any and all, but if you're doing it, great. If you have things to add, please do so. Dan is sharing that continuing meds when there is improvement is the same as continuing to wear glasses when vision is satisfactory when wearing them, but not without glasses. Or continuing to wear a jacket when you are sufficiently warm, but overly warm with it on and cold without it. The idea here, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong or interrupt me, but we need support beyond, right? Beyond the 30 days of medication that's provided post-hospitalization. We just want to make sure that, again, we are really truly assessing what it is a child needs and supporting it or increasing access to that kind of support. But your encouragement of normalizing the process or normalizing asking for help or getting the information, I think is critical. One of the things that happened, and so I want to also give a huge shout out to the district that I was a part of, which is Santa Ana Unified School District, because you're going to see examples that come directly from their campaign. And I have to tell you that I never thought that suicide prevention campaigning, and I know now, obviously years later, but in the beginning when we were talking about it, we were always in a direct service mindset. And so the importance of a campaign or providing it universally, information universally, wasn't always a top priority. But how things have switched and how wonderfully and beautifully has it switched, because we are in a place of giving importance to tier 1 or to students universally and a focus on prevention. And some of the activities that we really looked at were, making sure that, again, it's not just the teams doing the assessment or providing counseling support, right? Or mental health support have training and build their capacity, but also how about additional folks on site, including extended learning or after school programs. Oftentimes we forget to include them as far as support goes, but come 2:30 or 3 o'clock, they take our students, the same students, right? And in some cases hear more about what it is they're going through. And so it was critical to really open up to them. In our case, a helpline or provide services to them beyond that 2:30 timeframe. Other things that I know can be impactful are things like drop-in support groups, making sure things continue to go on. And to Dan's point about normalization, the more that we offer, even if you only get a couple of students, and this is what was happening, right? There wasn't a whole lot of folks coming into the drop-ins, the educational supports about mindfulness, or the groups on self-care, collective care. It took a while to get there. And I think my biggest message is stick with it. Because what we're doing and offering is normalizing the fact that there is help on campus and that it is okay to talk about this ongoing. So you just keep offering those drop-in psychoeducation opportunities for people to learn. I'll go on to talk about, I'm just going to pick out a couple because I want to make sure we get to some of the examples later on. But when we make any sort of presentation or provide these offerings, I tell you now, we all kind of are like, I don't know if we're going to record it, but if you do record it and you make it available, our kids check. And one of the biggest learnings I have to say is, we all, and if you ask me, my defining moment in this work at the district was, I remember the day that we all closed down because of COVID. But in that moment, the work and the help didn't stop. In fact, it increased, and we had to find a way to reach these students, right? Even when we were in COVID and we all went virtual, whatever that meant at that particular date and time, right? And so I say that because our kids have this amazing ability to find anything online. We'll click on anything that we put out there. And I guess what I want to say is please don't diminish the importance of or think that no one's looking at your recordings, your videos, or the resources that you post, because they are important. So record them. Other things that are important, especially at that tier, I'm going to skip to as you read through this, is really the campaign aspect. Because here is where I think that, SAUSD has really been a leader in the county, and I think beyond as well. And so I want to share some of those examples, and I think it's in color is amazing. this calendar, many of you have probably have something like this, and it's a culmination of all of these kind of mental health and wellness related themes that can be talked about. And I throw this out here because I think what we tend to do with suicide prevention, and I know that we were guilty of this too, not guilty of this, but this is what we did. September, right? Suicide prevention month, right? And week. And we would focus all of our attention to that. And it was rightfully so, beginning of the year. The thing is that we saw this dip in this the awareness, the ability to talk about it, the help seeking behavior. We saw a dip after September, right? Because there were other things that were happening. And when we began to kind of pull these themes monthly, we realized, like, though September is the month, right? Suicide prevention doesn't stop, and we can incorporate all of these practices throughout the entire school year. We embed it in weeks like Random Acts of Kindness Week in February. And eventually it evolved into what is pretty amazing and continues today, is that February is We Care Month for SAUSD. We Care is the actual campaign for suicide prevention, but it started with this combination of using the themes that already exist. In this case, it was Random Acts of Kindness, and it became a reminder of self-care and care for others. And it promotes that whole thing about collective care. The other thing you're not going to see that's reflected on here is just a reminder of the fact that that we can embed suicide prevention campaign and promotion and mental health awareness through cultural observances. So being aware of what is important to my school, my community, my families, and highlighting it with mental health awareness pieces during that month. They're not separate, they complement each other. And so just thinking about who it is that you are serving, those who are commonly unserved or underserved, we want to elevate that and highlight, again, mental health services at those critical times and moments. Other things to consider. So as far as trauma-informed approaches, right, for the assessors, many of you are the lead or the lead assessor, or you're training the teams. One thing I learned very quickly, I remember starting with the district, and I was a coordinator of mental health. And the thing is that is an umbrella of working with multiple teams, from school psychologists, school counselors, to school social workers, right? And I'm probably leaving other folks out, but I will say that what was very apparent to me is that we were all working differently. In some cases siloed, but I will say is that everybody had a different point of reference. There wasn't one sort of protocol or procedure that we were working from, and that added to us being kind of disconnected. And one of the first things that I think that we learned very quickly is that we can work together, that instead of one group, it's going to be a collaboration and representatives from each group having that voice. So there, internal collaboration leading to single protocol, because if we're not all in it, it's not going to happen. And naming it and actually putting on, for example, the list here, right? The folks, the roles who are a part of this and are deemed the assessors is critical. Other things I want to highlight on this protocol sheet. This is something that was trained to every single year at the beginning of the year, you know, and you see walk or talk in the beginning. Biggest highlight, right, of suicide prevention and making sure that we were getting help when help is needed. And the trauma-informed piece is not only getting help, but ensuring that it's happening in that moment and that we are not dropping off, is we either walk that child to somebody who can help immediately, right, or talk with them, right, until help comes. There's no leaving this child unsupervised or leaving them behind. Aside from that, we have the numbers on here, and you can see kind of the flow, but it doesn't end. And I think one of the things that we all agreed upon, and what we had been kind of faced with, was our role had stopped upon that child being hospitalized. But the moment we said, no, we're going to open the doors and collaborate with the hospitals, the emergency departments, that right, allowed us more of an opportunity to help. And so therein lies, and I think it was brought up earlier, the hospitalization, the reintegration process, or what we call reentry. And so you'll see a piece at the bottom there of how to bring that child back, right? How do we help accommodate them? How do we help work with them? Now, this next piece was really the revision. Again, I do have to say, gosh, it was really hard, and we had to come up almost immediately with the distance learning environment supports, right? I apologize if you hear dog barking in the back, but I will say that this was critical, and it still continues to today as we still have virtual learning models. Have these things ready, and folks will need it. Even though we think we have talked about it, trained to it, what we quickly learned is that we just, again, have to continue to revisit it, because we don't typically look at this until we are in crisis. So it follows a similar model, but it talks about the fact of how to work with the community, especially calling 911, as opposed to some of the other steps of calling someone in-house. Now, we talked about, okay, when we shared the initial ones with our educators, our teaching staff, it was overwhelming. And so we felt we had to really address all of the different team members throughout the district. And so this is a revised suicide protocol for teachers and other staff who do not do assessment. And you can see how it is simplified, but it's very direct about what are the steps are. We learned that the messaging had to be different, right? But it had to connect, they had to be aligned so that, again, no child is missed. Other things that occurred, and you could read through some of this and see some of the art. But when we opened up the suicide prevention campaign to all, something wonderful and beautiful happened. We had students in visual arts departments who loved visual arts, want to create and be a part of this message. We had students who absolutely were champions for mental health, want to be a part of this art contest. This was a unifying event that brought so many different kids, staff members together. It continues to today, as I mentioned. And you can see some of the impact. One student here basically shared that she didn't think, or we actually gave her a little bit more purpose to her art, and that she sees the difference that it makes, right? As far as like putting that message all throughout the school. And again, part of that is normalizing it throughout the schools. Everywhere you went, from elementary, middle to high school, because of this contest, you saw visual representation of love, support, and care, all under, right, suicide prevention efforts. So something else that's really, really supportive. And I see, Dan, thank you for more feedback about School Attendance Awareness Month. Absolutely same month as Suicide Prevention Month. We can connect these things by addressing exactly mental health challenges, right? Addressing trauma, talking about it. They're not disconnected. So thank you for sharing that. As far as campaigning, okay, so we started this movement, it continued, it got some attention, and then we got the board's attention. And that can be great, and that can be scary too, because what does that mean? And I think you all know what I mean by that. We actually got a huge amount of board support in this message, but then we got special requests, things like we wanted every school bathroom, we want a sign up, much like, or borrowing from previous maybe campaigns for human trafficking or intimate partner violence, but they wanted this everywhere. And that was huge. It was a huge task. But what I'm trying to get you to see is that that doesn't happen just out of our Student Support Services office, because there's no funding like that. But what you see is that as that momentum continued to go with this, with universally to all students and staff, so did funding. The board actually moved funding for us to allow to expand these programs, all because, again, dare I say it was working, but it was innovative programming that helped to, and campaigning that helped to move this along. So I hate to say proof is in the pudding, but it is. And I want to share that we were very lucky to have the talents of amazing people within the district. We began to see and be asked for, like, how do I wear the logo? So again, the campaign is We Care, right? How do we represent? We want to be on campus. We want to represent. You had staff asking for it. And so therein lies the workwear, right? But I will say the most beautiful thing about this was not only were staff, some some schools designated a particular day of the week to wear, just like you would a college day, for example, where shirts or sweatshirts, they would designate a particular day. What was beautiful was community partners who were providing maybe restorative practice circles. Maybe they were providing NAMI student groups. Maybe they were providing the list goes on. They were asking to represent within these shirts. It got bigger than just the school site. And then you had students. So third picture here is student-led groups that were beginning to bring up the campaign and lead it beyond what the district was pushing out. I mentioned that it happened during COVID, and even the masks were something that was called upon. People wanted to wear this internally, externally, and represent within the community. It wasn't uncommon to run into somebody wearing the shirt out at the local supermarket. Other things we wanted to share with you is just being inclusive. And I know that you are. We just wanted to make sure that we fully expressed it in the work, not only the workwear, but the logos, the branding of this. So you see here, the initial is on the left, the initial or original logo that evolved to make sure that we were reaching out to and representing for LGBTQ students and staff members, as well as the monarch butterfly there for dreamers and newcomers. And those were shirts. We could order them. We could put them on the different materials related to mental health as well, mental health awareness and suicide prevention. Bottom left, we had different stickers. Bottom right is also a sticker. Zoom backgrounds. It became something beyond, again, just the September. We knew we had to go beyond just beyond the students and staff. And we, again, focused in on parents. There were different kinds of groups that were offered. And I mentioned that there were parents who said, what happens at the hospital? And so putting together information about what that process is, demystifying things like what are the codes used? What does it mean to be inpatient, outpatient, 5150, 5885? Sorry, my dog just walked up. But I was going to say, they wanted to know everything from what does it mean for a 3-day hold, and how can my child come out of that, or what, all of that was something that we could provide to parents, sharing our knowledge of it. We also provided support to prevention pieces or parent-to-parent groups that were so powerful, because you heard the stories of one parent and their journey in supporting through and becoming a trainer of other parents, right, on how to support their child through mental health struggles. Community partners again came out. We had ongoing mental health and wellness resource fairs, self-care calendars that were promoted on social media, as well as any ELAC or DLAC meetings. And it became, again, I keep talking about how it got bigger than just the district and specific schools. Schools were adding in additional weeks of mental health awareness. Top right is a picture of just these amazing Seagerstrom cheerleaders who created a cheer for We Care and for suicide prevention. We had students who brought in, again, their own community partners, and they invited them and held their own awareness week with resource tables for all students at lunchtime. So it's lighting the fire, it's starting something, and it really is more of a movement. You know, we talked a little bit, I think it mentioned earlier, about like culture, but being aware of, again, who it is we're serving in the community, of it making support items approachable, accessible to all in different languages. We have Dia de los Muertos every year, huge community events, and celebrated all of our campuses, and making sure We Care was represented at those places as well. The message continues and doesn't go away. And again, don't be afraid of continuing to bring it up. Again, normalizing help seeking. I just want to point out that in our trainings, we never walked away without giving students something. And so we had these We Care cards. their business size cards, something that they could put in their planner. And now it's actually in their planner, where there's always a page of resources and a list of who they can go to when at school, who they can go to at home, and how they feel, and just always having the message present for them as well as resources. I want to just kind of, I know I've gone on and on, but I want to show you a little bit of this. Something powerful is the video message. And so this is a clip of the We Care message that was used actually to begin the actual campaign.
He's 14 years old and he had a sign of depression.
It all kind of started when my mom died.
That's when she started opening up to me that she was cutting herself.
I started to hurt myself. I would cut myself.
And he tried to commit suicide himself. And that she just didn't know she wanted to.
I think he doesn't want people to know about what he's struggling or what's going on with his life.
I couldn't fathom how a person could be so okay at school and hold that in.
Others would just tell me, you're fine, you're gonna be okay. I just actually really needed some help. If my friends didn't tell my counselor, I would beat it.
You don't have to do it alone.
Never too late to ask for help.
No judgment, no criticism, just an open space for you to be able to talk about whatever is going on.
Hi, I'm Nada Schiff, and I'm here to help. Come find us.
Instead of them harming themselves, they could talk to their parents, a counselor.
Talk to your friends, talk to your teachers. It'll help you more than you think it will.
I see you. I see you each day that you're in my class.
We all care about you. That's why we do. We're not just here to enforce rules and laws. We actually are here to care for compassionate people. So don't be scared to contact one of our police officers.
We have a really awesome community on campus, and if you ever need help, please ask.
And know that there is a rainbow at the end of the storm.
Don't just keep it in and explode. I want you guys to ask help, okay? That's the only thing I want you guys to do. Ask for help.
It makes me really happy to know that she's okay. So many people who are rooting for you and your success.
SAUSD cares.
Junto y cuentan. Teachers care.
I care. Get help.
I care.
Get help. Everybody cares.
Get help.
I care. Get help, okay? Like now, please.
And I share this because so much is possible. I talked about, gosh, the list of people who could provide assessment, right? And from school social workers to school psychologists, school counselors, school nurses, SROs, but you'll see that it was the spectrum of support. We had peer leaders on there as well as folks in the office. And what a difference it makes to have that We Care branding on any one of those windows to know that they can go to you for help. That video is pretty awesome. I take no credit for it. That is all production of those wonderful people there at SAUSD. So I just want to kind of share that and again, highlight it. But what a wonderful way. It was promoted not only in classrooms, but again, in the parent meetings, as well as in staff trainings at the beginning of the year, still continues. Towards the end, if I let it continue, you would see, again, local as well as resources, so many layers to it too. They happen to have the school resource officers attached, so they have their own police department. And so even trying to create community there and to connect as opposed to, or at least address any sort of fear towards police, that was also addressed too. So a lot of different layers, but again, the message is clear that there is help. So let me try to move forward that I encourage you to see what resources you have. Again, all of this came up out of just putting that message out there, and folks from visual arts, performing arts, people wanted to be a part of the movement. Other things that work that can be done, you will have access, and many of you are familiar with it. It is a California Directing Change initiative. So it's actually a competition that happens every year, where students can create their own art and submit it, right, to the state, and it is creating their own PSA. Well, the last video you saw was created by adults. They can do their own. And so I would just want to encourage you to look to that, directingchange.org, and you can incorporate that or bring it to your state as well. But I was going to say a lot of Californians on here, and just how powerful that can be, because it is, again, student projects. It meets a lot of different requirements, but sends the message again for suicide support. The next couple sections are pretty short, so I just kind of want to run through them quickly and share with you. As we look to reach our smaller groups and move more towards targeting and providing early intervention, this is where the power of student-led groups comes in. And so bringing in, whether it's NAMI or with us, it has been the Hope Squad, talking about suicide prevention, as well as our local NAMI chapter. There's also through our County Department of Ed, a student mental health. As far as tier 3, we do go to these. I want to share some examples that are specific to more of the direct service, face-to-face type of support. And you see the list here as well, but let me share some of the tools that kind of correspond to it. We know we need to, and this was kind of brought up earlier as far as being inclusive. What came out of a suicide prevention campaign led to an identity support plan supporting transgender youth. And so the creator of that, Lindsay Etheridge, actually put together this particular, and you see the We Care branding on there, but when we're talking about creating, again, support plans for youth who are transgender and coming up with safe places on campus, as well as, safe people on campus, this is where it wasn't a separate thing. It all kind of came together. And so a beautiful mix of, again, trauma-informed practices all around. Aside from that, we talked about reintegration or reentry. And if you take a quick look at what this form looks like, what you're going to pick up on, or what I hope you pick up on, is essentially the medication concerns that were brought up earlier are on here. Let's have a discussion. It essentially guides the discussion and makes us think about who are those people we want to invite. If you haven't invited emergency department or hospital folks to our campus, this might be the start of it, right? Community partners who provide outpatient support, outpatient programming, invite them as well. If a student has an IEP, invite that team as well. So everyone can be a part of this and has a voice to add in how we can all provide support when that student comes onto campus and anytime after, right? And so it talks about who's there, what are the potential concerns, what do we know as far as accommodations that are needed, if we need to change maybe even like the learning structure, where their seat is. Everything from, we've had students who could not be in the traditional school hours. And so we had to look at different models of support, individual learning, virtual learning, alternative ed at other sites. So what is it that they need? And so you'll see the list goes on. And also a sense of accountability and folks signing and making sure they're a part of this. We also invite the parents as well, so that all of those release forms can be available. So just so you know, I just want to make sure that this calls to attention, but what it is really a place for all of the stakeholders and supporters to land and have a true discussion of how we're going to support this kid. This walks us through the process of it. So you'll have this for you, but just giving instruction. I know we always talk about protocol policy, writing this down and making sure it comes with that reentry form is important. So training to that is going to be important. And with that, I know I've shared a lot. I'm going to pass it back to Angela to share a little bit more about this implementation planning tool.
Yeah, I'm going to quickly go through this, Tina. It was so exciting to see all of the wonderful things that happened at Santa Ana Unified. And I'm also just reminiscing of all the different experiences that I've had in other school districts that I've worked in providing some of the work. But really, this implementation planning tool was just developed to help to support all of this, right? So there's so much work that we were in charge of as school leaders, right? So we had to do training, we had to revise the policy, we had to consult, this was like, a daily process for us as well. And so it's really about thinking about, are we doing what we said we were going to do, right? So for those that are familiar with that question, that comes from PBIS, right? So it's really looking back. Are we doing all of the work? Is it working? Like those are the pieces that are really, really important around that work.